Craig Wishart, really out here truly doing the Lord's work, man. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, man, I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Look, I alluded to it, man. I think if there's any profession out here truly doing the Lord's work, it's got to be what you're doing. So I'll open the floor up to you to share with anybody listening. What is it exactly that you do for work?
So I work for an organization called Mercy Chefs. We are a disaster and emergency response feeder. So any conflict zone that exists anywhere in the world, any disaster zone, or just like famine, or when there are a bunch of like malnourished kids, we're going to be there and try and do what we can. It's a faith-based organization, but there are some other organizations that will require like their volunteers to sign a statement of faith and all that. And we're like, let's bring everyone on board. And like, I think that's how the Lord works, man. And it's a really, really cool place to work.
Are you at liberty to share some of the places around the globe that you've been during your time with Mercy Chefs?
So most recently, I was in Pakistan, which I think the American mind on Pakistan is a little bit naive. Like, we don't really know what happens there or what goes on. And it's a super close country, right? Like, it borders Afghanistan. The Taliban has a presence there. We stopped in a town. Like, we weren't even allowed to look out the windows. We had a Humvee behind us and a Humvee in front of us. And like, they would not allow us to look out the windows. Yeah. So Pakistan most recently, and then I think in January, I was in Iraqi Kurdistan. I was about 20 miles north of Mosul, which a lot of people will know Mosul is kind of like the ISIS stronghold. December, I was in Cuba. And then, November, we've been ongoing in the war, the front line of the war in Ukraine since the very beginning, since about a week after it started. So I go periodically. I think I've been 4 times since the war started. And yeah, man. And then domestically, I was in Asheville for 20 days after Helene hit, and yeah, all over. It's been 3 years. So
it's incredible. And it's so funny, man. So we, for anybody curious, Craig and I are connected through a mutual friend, and we were at this mutual friend's wedding, and we got to talking, and I'm just, casually say to Craig, "Oh, what do you do for work?" And he, starts to tell me about how he deploys all around the globe and how he's doing so much good and, frankly, have been in a lot of conflict zones. And I think my first question, and one that I'd love you to answer here before we really get into it, is like, how does one find themselves in this line of work, right? Like, I have a normal 9 to 5. I go to my job, I come home, and that's it. Your job is to like get on a plane and go somewhere where people need your help. How'd you get into it?
I got laid off from a job in New York, which honestly was the best thing to ever happen to me. My best friend or best friends from college, her parents started Mercy Chefs. I was probably unemployed for 4 or 5 weeks, which like unemployment is maybe the low. And it goes to like the worship thing, right? Like my work defines me a little bit. Like what I'm doing, like gives me a fuel that nothing else does. And so in that time, you're just like, you're in a void of depression and anxiety and not knowing where things are going to go. So I got the end of my rope and reached out to this girl, Megan, and was like, "Hey, is there anything I could do?" But I had been a complete degenerate for the entire time I knew them. And like, this is a faith-based organization. And I'd started to come around in my faith and in my head. And by the grace of God, man, like, I think I have some friends that see things and see potential in me that I don't even see. And this girl was like, "There's a hurricane that just hit Puerto Rico and we're sending a team. Like, let's see how you do." I went, bro. And I, on the second day, remember calling my wife and just like weeping and being like, it's not even that I would want to do something else, but like, I literally can't do anything else.
Just to contextualize this and to frame it, like in our mind's eye, when we imagine you in these places, you've talked about serving people, but like, what are you guys doing? What are the types of activities that you are bringing these people into? Can you just describe like a day in the life on, let's call it a deployment of yours?
Mercy Chefs and the posture of Mercy Chefs has always been to like feed anyone that needs a meal. So that's kind of how we approach everything. From the moment I wake up, like my job is to say yes in someone's day. Whether that fits in the lane of food, that's one thing. But like if it's outside the lane, like it's still my job to say yes and to like help someone. So a lot of times like our chefs roll in and the team rolls in probably 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. We're showing up that early for lunch because we're turning out 20,000 meals. But my job on domestic has turned into a little bit of like scouting. And so I will spend the first few days like really just driving into the worst hit areas and making a connection with a local leader, government official, mayor, policeman, something like where we can figure out like, hey, first of all, does your area need food distribution? Where are
Yep.
the worst hit areas? So yeah, we'll go and do that like 9 to 12, and then you're delivering meals. You're out being with people. I think the coolest thing too is like, and such a privilege is we lead with our action. I'm not proselytizing when I go out. I'm not evangelizing to people. And there are cases where like we pray with people and stuff, but like I truly believe that our food represents the gospel. And like
Yeah.
someone
Right.
opens up this meal that's a 5 course. There's a salad, there's dessert, there's a hot pasta or whatever. There's meat. Like it's good food. We eat it as well. So yeah, that's kind of how a day looks. Are usually we're wrapped up, ending, and everyone's out by 9 o'clock, 10.
So
You're
it's a round the clock job,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I would say you can go 20 plus days on 3, 4, or 5 hours of sleep, but your mentality is totally changed, bro. Because it's privilege. It doesn't feel like work. You're in it with these people, and you need to be in it with these people. And so,
What about internationally? Is it primarily the same, or like,
yeah.
you know, because if you're in Asheville, at least you're in a state in the continental US. But when you go somewhere like Pakistan, is it different, or is it the same, but now you're just somewhere that is completely foreign to you?
It's totally different and totally the same in a lot of ways.
It's both, right?
Yeah, it's both. And like when we go to the front line in Ukraine, it takes me 5 days to get there. I'm going flights, which like a flight to Warsaw is already a pretty long trek, and then it's a 25-hour sleeper train to Kharkiv, which is a far eastern town in Ukraine that has been on the news a lot. And then our kitchen is even closer to the front line, so we're about 10 kilometers off the front line at the kitchen, and then doing deliveries.
And can I ask, like, do you have to wear like body armor when you do this type of work?
Yeah, yeah. We kind of take cues from the people that we're with. We have a Ukrainian team. They're called the Volunteers of God, and they are 5 Ukrainian guys that all can't serve, but have found other ways to help. And I also want to say, like, we're not assisting in the war. So we're not like feeding soldiers. Our role is to feed victims of what's going on. So that looks like at the front line of Ukraine, that looks like a lot of elderly people who are just getting bombed to oblivion. You're going through apartment complexes that are just crazy. So when we go and do a distribution, we have a few guys who are constantly monitoring where the lines are moving, right? So where Russia's advancing, where Ukraine is losing ground. And unfortunately, like that's kind of just how it's been. They will identify, like it's down to a science for these guys, but identify a town that they think will be kind of taken over in 6 months. We then begin feeding programs with groceries and hot food, and then also water, so potable water, in those towns that are probably going to be taken over 6 months. The reason we do that, which is like, it doesn't sound like that would be a sustainable thing. The front line of Ukraine, it's agricultural and very, very, very poor. And if you live in the towns that are getting bombed, you're generational, right? Like you're a family that's been there for a very, very long time. And so our goal, our mission is to be able to build trust with these people so that when mortars start coming down, when these towns start getting bombed, they know, oh my gosh, like the Volunteers of God, they love me, I trust them. They'll call us, and then our team actually does the medical evacuation side as well. So we'll receive a call, drive into the thick of it, and have to carry a 90-year-old out of their home and get them off the front line. And then we have a few shelters that we help run right off the front line as well.
In the case of, let's say, Ukraine, we see places like this on the news all the time. And I think we're all biased in some way. We kind of are fed whatever narrative that we're fed about these places, whether it's good, bad, who knows.
Totally.
I'm curious, though, with you having experienced this firsthand, like what stands out to you about the people of these places? Like what is it here in the U.S. that we should know more about, or we should really keep in mind when thinking about what it's like to live in a place like Ukraine right now?
Have you ever driven through like deep south, like pretty poor, like agricultural areas in like the deep south?
Yeah, so for example,
like
the worst I've probably seen is like deep in the Appalachian region in like West Virginia.
Cool. So I would compare the level of living would be similar to that, probably even less in some way. So it's these small villages. Obviously, it's very different problems than what's faced in Appalachia. But it's your grandma then, man. It's your grandpa. It's all elderly. It's all people that just don't have anywhere else to go, man. Like we'll go to an apartment complex and maybe it's a 1,000-person like family home apartment complex. So like big building after building, and they're all like old, like Soviet Union buildings, right? So everything looks the same. You're in these like very brutalist like architecture buildings. And they're just torn to shreds, bro. For whatever reason, the powers that be decided that they need to gain this ground and go into these places. So yeah, those are the people that we're dealing with, man. It's not no one that's militant. It's no one. It's honestly people that like they have an opinion because they're forced to have an opinion about what's going on. But like they just want to be at peace. They're farmers. They're not like doing anything crazy. So. Yeah.
It sounds like in a lot of cases, these are folks that are just caught in the middle of a bad conflict.
The one story that I think is totally worth telling about what is going on in Ukraine and like the team there and kind of the people that we work with, and speaks to the faith side as well of it, because I think it's really important, like in a conflict zone. I know there was a question about fear and that kind of thing, and I'm excited to get to it if that comes up. But the guy who leads our team in Ukraine, his name is Anatoly. He goes by Tolik. He's a bear of a man. Probably 275, 6'3", 6'4", just like huge dude. He puts on his Kevlar and it's like, that looks like a baby vest on you, bro. Like you're just massive, dude. They were doing a delivery and the lines are constantly moving. So you'll be in a city or in a town and like you're fine on this block. Like you're still gonna be mortared and stuff, but like you're fine on this block. But if you go to the block over, you're in Russian territory and you're screwed. They were doing some deliveries and found themselves over the Russian line, and a mortar was hit. And the next thing Tolik knows is a mortar hits the truck and he like comes to his senses kind of and is completely blind, has no idea where he is, manages in this field that they're in, because you also like you're not driving on roads a lot of the time. It's crazy, right? Like, you go to the front line through a farm, right? Like you're just driving like in the middle of a farm to get there,
just like on grass and dirt. Yeah, like I have to imagine that the infrastructure of a lot of these places is just blown to shreds.
Yeah, bro.
If it even ever existed,
gone. Yeah, totally. Well, and yeah, that's the other thing is it's like it was Soviet infrastructure before, which was like not super great. And so he gets out of the car and I think just starts like praying or something, but like the Holy Spirit just like tells him to start crawling in a direction. And so he just starts crawling like through this field, and there's like mortars coming down, all these things. He gets to safety. Our other guys are kind of able to put him in another truck. That truck was completely destroyed because of a mortar. And then Tolik was in a coma for 3 months because shrapnel went straight through his head. This guy 6 months later is back out leading our teams, full eyesight, everything. He has a scar. He'll get stressed out and he like rubs his scar, but like literally shrapnel through the head, but it's not going to stop him, man, because it's a higher purpose. It's a higher calling. And like, that doesn't phase you, right? Like that's a risk that we take. That's a conversation I have with my wife every time I leave to go somewhere.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Is that really a conversation that, hey, I'm going somewhere that's not safe?
Yeah, it's on my hands though, you know, like
right.
I have a call. I'm called to a particular thing. And I think that the moment that's also taken out of your hands, like fear subsides a little bit. And that's not to say I'm not fearful.
Well said.
It's not to say I'm not fearful or that I don't have anxiety, but like Christ is so centering in what we do that like if I'm able to just return to that centering place to remember like, hey, like this is so much bigger than me. And this goes to the like, when do you become a man conversation is like a lot of my realization is I'm not unique really. And that's not, I don't mean that in a negative way, but like I have a purpose, but like I'm put on this earth for a reason. And I think we've conflated that to be like, oh, I need to stay and I need to be this unique. And it's like, no, bro, we need to drive towards goodness and light. And that is our purpose, right? Like,
that is so well said. And I think, look, candidly, I'll speak from personal experience. I think sometimes that's easy to say, and sometimes it's hard for me to feel that way. I think I'm still finding out what exactly it is that I feel called and compelled to do. And I'm a little bit envious of you that you found this thing that you're so fired up about. I have to ask, like you alluded to sort of, giving it up to Christ when you go to these places, putting it in his hands. Has there ever been a moment of fear, or truly when you're away, do you feel whatever happens, it happens?
I think there have been a few. And I would say that every time it's happened, it's fleeting. Like by the time I'm realizing it, it's already something that's being worked on and solved. For example, and a really real example, and it sounds so cliche, and I think that 3 or 4 years ago, I would have heard some of me say that, like me say these things, and I'm like, that's BS. That's like, that doesn't
Totally.
happen. But like, I turned on worship music every time I started to feel anxious, man. And that recentering happened again, right? Like I'm taken out of my own body. I'm doing something that I, by God, feel called to do. Where can fear exist in that? If it's not for just my mortal flesh, which like, who gives a crap, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, it's so eternally insignificant. And that's not to say I'm not scared of death either, because I am. But again, it's one of those both and things that I think they just like, I'm figuring it out as it's happening. And also Christ is working on my heart as these things are happening. And I'm not just trying to give you Christian fluff either. I hope that it doesn't come across that way.
In no way do I feel like you are virtue signaling right now. It is so rare to see a man so convicted in something, let alone how dangerous this is, right? Like there is a real risk every time you go anywhere that something bad is going to happen to you. But as you speak about this, I sense no fear. I do wonder, the human experience, I think in a non-morbid way is defined by suffering and also grace. You've seen a lot of suffering, but you've also seen and given a whole lot of grace to folks. How do you process that, right? Like this is something that we don't really talk about generally as people, and I think as men, but like, do you compartmentalize this stuff? Does it haunt you? And if it's a sensitive subject, feel free to pass on it. But like, how do you deal with this? This is heavy stuff.
I wanna say something, and this has been something I've been just like ideating on a little bit and thinking about a lot. For such a long time, I looked at as conviction as like fear and guilt. I think over the past 3 years, conviction has turned into opportunity in my eyes, which is like so cool, right? Like it's not something that holds me back or that I have to just confess. It's like conviction means that I'm supposed to go farther. I'm supposed to do more. And with how I deal with it, I have such a cool support system, man. My wife she actually just started working for Mercy Chefs, which is so cool.
Way. That's amazing.
Yeah, we're all on the train now. Yeah, so she's on a work trip, and now I'm on like the sad side of work trip where I'm just home, which is like, this sucks way more than going out. But I am able to process things through friends. I want to find a therapist, someone I can talk to more regularly. I've tried a few times and it just hasn't stuck. Just kind of the
it usually takes multiple tries, man.
Yeah. And it's also like my schedule is so wishy-washy that like even with us trying to schedule this, right? Like imagine me trying to go to therapy regularly. It's kind of a hard thing. The other thing that I will say is my work family is ridiculous, bro. Like I was on a call today and we were talking about Pakistan, and I would love to talk more about Pakistan as well, if that's something we can get into. And I would say, I mean, there are 8 people on the call and just openly weeping, right? And like, that's processing though, right? Like I'm talking to people who are in the work and they're doing the things as well. And the fact that we have the privilege of being with someone who is suffering in the way that they are, and that through Christ and like through being in the hands and feet, there can be some kind of respite to that. And we see it over and over again where like joy fills a room and hope fills a room. And a lot of like I said earlier, a lot of times there don't even need to be words for it, but like these things, they happen. And so I think processing happens a lot through that. The other thing is like, I'm blessed enough, again, like with the Christian language stuff, but like, I can put a lot of this on my creator, you know, like I don't have to just carry this load on my own. And knowing that it's my calling, like the idea of personal relationship with Christ is very new to me. My dad's an Anglican priest, which is great. So cool that I grew up in the faith and like, and had this, how I looked at it for a long time and how I looked at faith was like knowing theology and apologetics and having the right things to say about church history. And I'm finding now like the relationship also has to be held in tension. And the relationship is so deeply personal that like I can't get away from it now. And it's cool to see like, oh, these habits that I was trying to form when I was talking about church history or certain theology, right? Like aligning my heart with Christ, like those are coming true now because I have a personal relationship, but like they're just working in tension.
I just have to say, on the topic of Christ and Christianity, let me just say, this is not a Christian podcast, but it has been so surprising to me how often this topic comes up. I find that with a lot of individuals that are striving or finding their purpose, whether it's Christ or another faith, I find that individuals are so much more able to contextualize the arc of their lives when they look at it through Christ or through a higher power. It's so interesting to me how when folks come on and share their story or share their ambitions and their goals, almost every time it circles back to Christ or some other, let's say, faith. I would like to hear more about your most recent deployment, because I know you were in Pakistan and we've talked a bit about Ukraine. You've been all over the world. Most recently, you were over there. Is there anything that you want to touch on?
The first thing I want to say is there are 4.5 million people in slavery in Pakistan. This is.
What do you mean by that?
So the way I look in Pakistan is a lot of it is bonded slavery, a lot of it isn't. And bonded slavery is slavery where you are forced to take out a loan. So it's a lot of, and mostly Christian, actually. In a country like Pakistan and in that region of the world, you have an identification card which will give your basic information. Kind of looks like our IDs, but it actually says your religion too, or like what your father was, that kind of thing. So Christians have a very, very, very hard time getting work because it is on their identification card. They have to take out loans for everyday life things. Like, and I'll circle back to this family, but in one of the slave communities we went to, we met a family who had 6 children. All 6 of them had chronic liver disease.
Oh my goodness!
Because their 12-year-old girl was walking like an 80-year-old person, just so weak, couldn't do anything. Also, I know there are a lot of 80-year-olds that move like fire, so no hate.
True.
But she just like couldn't move, and so they were first generation slaves. And what that means is there will be kind of an overlord, and they go to hospitals and they wait for these kinds of people to come in, and they'll say something like, we'll give you the loan that you need to keep your children alive if you work for us. And they water it down completely of what it actually is. And so people will take out a loan of like thousands of dollars to try and solve this problem. And then they find themselves living at a brick kiln. And so we were in 4 different slave communities. And like I said, 4.5 million. So just scratching the surface of the problem. They're making for every 1,000 bricks that a family makes, right? Which is 1,000 bricks per family is the daily quota. They're making 30 cents to $1.75.
And how deep in debt are these people?
This family in particular, I'll just keep using them as an example. They owed $4,000.
Yeah, I mean, you just do the math on that. It's insurmountable.
And the money that they're making also has to go towards their food, any kind of
I didn't even
clothing,
think about that.
right? Like it's not just like everything they're pouring goes into this thing, which is another cool piece of like I can talk more about this in a second, but like what the food is able to offer in and like taking away the food side. But they're Christian villages that are stuck in this situation. I'll stay on this family for a second. Another piece that became very clear to us while we're there is you kind of get tip of the iceberg, and then you get to experience it and you're like, I had no idea. And I've actually felt some guilt for not knowing some things, like their struggle like that. Like, how could I not know about that? The oldest daughter, so I took a picture of the family, and the oldest daughter was not in the picture because she was being forced to live in the slave master's home and do whatever he wanted to do to her. And this is happening across the board in pretty much every one of these communities. So that's like one piece of what we were doing in Pakistan was able to just go in, provide. So we've been providing food packs for about a year in a few of the communities, but we were able to locate some more that were able to help. But providing food packs with the goal and working with some other organizations to like also usher in education. The American church is a little bit aware of this issue. And so churches have like tried to do things to help, right? Like I tell you, a family can be bought out for $4,000. So there have been churches that will like adopt families basically and get them out of the situation. It has just monopolized slavery in Pakistan though. because now these slave owners are like, oh, I can just make a quick buck from some Americans. They don't have anywhere to go after they're bought out then, and then are just find themselves back in this situation, right? So like your children has chronic liver disease. So you're going to have to go to the hospital again. You're going to be a slave within 2 years again. And so this happens over and over again to the point of people like families being stuck in it for 6, 7 generations. And I would love to send you some of the photos as well of like just some of the most beautiful people, man. And the
It's
joy.
funny you say that. I was just gonna say I saw some of it on your Instagram story, and it is just like ironic. Like some of the most beautiful people, even some people that you see, and they just look like happy and joyful.
Yeah,
And
bro.
you hear through kind of what you're explaining some of the things that they are subject to, and it just really makes you reconsider like how lucky we are to be in a place like, you know, this country.
Yeah, it absolutely recontextualize everything. My prayer, my kind of 2 prayers, I guess. The one major one is that I'm able to walk in and like just help me unlearn things. Like I want to unlearn what I knew going in and give me a new perspective and a new light. And I find that like that is a really powerful prayer. The other prayer that's like I would say the most dangerous prayer you can pray is like, Lord, use me. And like that completely takes yourself out of it, right? And I found myself in situations and I'm like, yeah, how did I get here? Like what am I doing?
You're like, he must be using me for this, because how did I get here?
So yeah, just some powerful things, but we're trying to combat it with love. And I was like, one of my colleagues, man, one of the slave owners that we found out was really doing some stuff. One of my colleagues actually went over for him and met the guy, and like while he's meeting for like him, just prayed for him, but like obviously silently, but just was like nice. And I think that we have become so quick to like demonize people, but like in reality, man, the battle isn't like, the battle's not flesh and blood. These people are manipulated, and it might be generations that have been manipulated, but like my fight isn't with him, right? Like he's doing some of the most evil things on earth, but like my fight isn't with him, and he can still be redeemed through these things. And I believe that, and there's hope and joy in that. And it also releases you. And so like when we talk about processing, man, like that is such a powerful thing of like, I'm released from that. And if I'm released, like, or if these people are released, like certainly I'm released. And,
right.
you know, like it's unbelievable.
It says a lot, I think, that your mind goes to, you know, hey, let me pray for this person. Let me understand that maybe this is just a learned behavior and this person isn't inherently evil. I think I'm quick to judge. Let's put it that way.
Man.
And so I appreciate you saying that, man. And I couldn't think of a better thing to sort of start to just wrap up on in kind of contrast to all the bad that you've seen. It sounds like you still remain hopeful that good always prevails. Is that true?
I think good has prevailed, right? Like it's not even about it prevailing, right? Like it already has, and that's evident in the cross. And I'm like able to walk in that, and I feel like I'm using such Christian language, but I really don't know how else to like kind of just describe these things. Yeah, good prevails, bro, and it is prevailing, and it will continue to prevail. And there is evil in the world that I will never be able to reconcile, but it is reconciled already. And the battle like with that is won. And I think our call, right? Like my call isn't to do anything more than to love the person that's right in front of me. I think something that we've diluted a little bit in like maybe American Christianity or Western Christianity, but the idea of love your neighbor, that's not like a love everyone sentiment. And I think that like we don't have the capacity to love everyone, right? Like I
well
don't
said.
I don't have any of but like I can love the person right in front of me, right? Like it's like an alcoholic. Like we make the weirdest transit, but it's almost like an alcoholic, right? Like I can't say I'm not going to drink tomorrow, but I can say I'm not going to drink in the next hour. It's a very similar argument, right? Like if I'm able to put on my armor, bro, and just love the person right in front of me, then good is going to continue to prevail. And I'm just a very, 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 very small piece in a lot of really, really good work that people are doing. And unfortunately, it's like it's not known in American society. I think that we live in a state of perpetual comfort. And I even think that has like been a weird conflicting thing for me personally, is like in the beginning of doing this, like my relationship with Christ, like my personal kind of relationship, like I'd feel God like very powerfully when I was in another place, or like see him move, or like see the spirit move in a lot of ways. And then I would come back to the States, right? And I get back in my comfort and I don't see it at all, right? Like I think we're able to live in such an agnostic or like atheist or whatever you want to call it society that puts so much importance on things of very little eternal importance because of the comfort that we're drawing from. But I just would encourage people, like, do some research really about the evil that's going on, and then follow that research up with like who some of the organizations and people are doing good work and how you can come behind them. Like, I know we were talking about anxiety and depression earlier, and I don't think this is a solve for all things, but I would say, like, if you go out and you serve your neighbor, there's going to be a whole lot of good that is going to come to your life, right? There's going to be blessing that comes in ways that you can't even describe. And so, like, when we're feeling depressed, instead of turning to one thing immediately, just go try serving someone, man, and like and giving yourself away, because we get so bogged down by everything in our society that, like, just touching the person in front of you and loving them, man, is the most powerful anecdote that I've found.
Beautifully said. And in a world that I feel like seems so complicated and overwhelming, and all these people are trying to tell you to be this, that, and the other, what a nice, simple message to just love your neighbor. If folks are interested in learning more about you or in Mercy Chefs, are you comfortable sharing where they can reach you at?
Yeah, if anyone wants to talk about this, like my personal account is just at Craig Wishart. I would be so happy to dialogue with anyone about these things, about some of the things that I've seen, or things that we're involved in. And then Mercy Chefs is just at Mercy Chefs, and then mercychefs.com. And we're one of a lot of organizations who I think are doing a lot of good. But check us out. I think part of my job is, like, I am able to give a voice to what I think are the voiceless in a lot of situations. And so through storytelling and that kind of thing. But we tell a lot of the stories that we get, and of the people that we're helping and the people that are even blessing us. We show those on Instagram and Facebook and all those things. So yeah.
Amazing, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thanks for coming on and being vulnerable and sharing what it is you've been up to. And I think selfishly for me too, right? It's, I get caught up in my daily life, right? With my job, and am I making enough money? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? You hear stories like yours and you're like, you know what? Like, it's okay. Like, you're going to be okay. There are people out here doing some real good in the world. So, thanks, brother.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And I just, as the last note too, like, I, first of all, never want to sensationalize what I'm doing. But like I said in the beginning, I think that you're giving a voice to people that wouldn't have a voice otherwise. Like, right now, right? Like, you're chasing something greater than yourself. It feels, from listening to the podcast a little bit and hearing about your heart, like you're following what you feel called to do. And like, I think that is a good and God ordained thing. I'm not doing anything beyond that. I just am following what I think I'm called to do. And it's easy for me to be like, I don't know, to receive that and be like, oh, thank you. But like, I really, like, our work is our worship, and it's important that people like take their jobs and their vocation seriously, and like where you're placed is where you're going to have the most like significant role. And I obviously, there are crazy stories and there are things people don't totally know about that are going on in the world, but it's also happening in your backyard, and there are a lot of other people doing a lot of that good work, and it's happening in your workplace, like hopelessness. And I think we have a loneliness epidemic. I know you're in New York City, and like, that is nowhere truer than New York, right? And like, how can you combat that? And I think you're doing the work, man. So,
well, that's got to be one of the nice. You're gonna, that's gonna make me cry. Well, I'm not gonna cry on my show, or at least not yet. I haven't yet. But thanks, dude. Appreciate you.
Yeah, man.